Hi, today I want to discuss this very interesting video on perhaps one of the most debated topics in the West. The video is titled The Dark Side of Multiculturalism and is by Raymond Ibrahim. Multiculturalism has been a very frictional topic in the West. And the response of the people in the West to this increasing immigration and accumulation of people with different cultures or people of different races in their countries is shocking and strange. In one sense, it can be understood to be part of a very natural process that the people belonging to a specific culture will be strange, will behave in a strange manner or will look strangely towards the people of the another culture and will perhaps not display a welcoming reaction. The hostility of a certain people of having one set of cultural values towards the people who are of a different race or of a different culture is not entirely shocking, but the philosophical underpinnings of it that are being used to justify this hostility, that is really interesting. There's a very common argument that is often made that people who are immigrating to the West like West, obviously, and that is the reason why they are immigrating to these countries. This, in some sense, shows that the West is a better society than the societies from which they are coming. This is perhaps slightly true, but there is a common counter argument as well that can be developed. So you see, for example, this comment which mentions this, and everyone wants to come to the West and enjoy its culture. Well, this argument is kind of sensible, but suddenly you realize another thing. During the time of colonialism and imperialism, a lot of people from the West settled into the countries which they colonized or which became part of their country's imperialistic territories. Now, these people were not only living among these people of other races or cultures, but they were in minority. So the question could be asked, then why did they migrate to these countries? And we are not talking about the people who were required to be there because they were administering these countries. There were people who went to these countries just to live, to set up, probably because they saw more economic opportunities. Probably they saw that they could benefit from a superior status that the Westerners or the whites enjoyed because they had colonized these countries and they were in the important positions. Probably they knew that they would benefit from the fact that the whites were ruling these countries and they were whites also. And they could gain from exploiting the people, indigenous people of those countries. Probably it was because the cost of living in these countries was less. There were numerous factors, but it should be borne and kept in mind that people do give up away their cultures and choose to live in the countries where they are minority and where these tons of these people which are considered less civilized by many on the side of the people who are opposing multiculturalism, they chose to live among these people. And one can ask why. Were they not made aware of the fact that a culture of the country is important and perhaps they should not live in these countries where the people who have these values, the majority of people who have those values are not attuned to them or to their values? Why people chose to live in South Africa or Haiti or India or any other host of countries that were colonized by the Britishers, French, Portuguese, Spanish? It's an interesting question. But before we delve on this question, of course, we will come across this question again when we discuss this video. Let us look at this video. We'll start by playing the video and perhaps stop when there is an important discussion to be held. So let's start this video.
Are all cultures equal? That is, after all, the taken for granted premise behind the widely accepted notion of multiculturalism.
Actually, that is false. Multiculturalism does not advocate that all cultures are equal. That is something that is used by many of the people who are trying to mock the idea of multiculturalism. Sure, there may be some people in multiculturalism that would argue in a naive way that all are equal. What is generally the argument that is forwarded from the multiculturalist side of view is something that we can see in the comment section itself. Sure, till you arrive here and discover all its flaws. Not assuming that other cultures are flawless, but grading cultures in an absolute way is just arrogance. We should respect and learn from each other, not impose our values while assuming we have the right by just being better. That's the fool's narcissist doom. This comment shows that, sure, cultures may not be equal, but is any culture in a position to judge other cultures? This is the main point of contention. And this point of contention is not merely present in this debate. It is in the same point of contention in many debates, and it has originated from the West. Now let's play the video, and then we will discuss more on this topic as he brings those points himself.
A belief that has single-handedly led to the infusion of countless cultures into the West. I was reminded
This is actually not true as well. The reason why these cultures were infused in the West is because when these cultures were not in a very significant proportion, it was widely believed that the immigration will largely provide economic and other social benefits to the countries to which the people were immigrating. You have to understand this very interesting thing. Whenever the people try to whitewash history, what they will try to do is they try to ascribe reasons that were not pertinent at the time when the decisions that they hate were being made. And funnily enough, in this whole video, this person will try to defend the West while singling out or while keeping distance from those controversial decisions that are leading in his mind to the demise of the West. How can the West be distanced from the decisions that result in its demise? Consider, for example, a man, and this is very, very pertinent to the Western morality. Imagine a man who drinks too much, and he drinks too much on multiple occasions, and then one day he gets into a fight or he begins to drive for some reason because maybe he was thinking at that particular moment in time he won't drink much, but he drinks too much. Now, there are many times you drink too much and you drive, and many times you reach home safely. But due to uh, some guardian angel of non-luck, he hits a man or hits a woman, and he kills them or gravely injures them. Now the question is, should that guy be tried? The funniest thing is that if you go and look at the morality and the discussions in the West, people in the West often attribute responsibility, especially to the men, by arguing that if he was not good enough to drive, he should not have drunk. And so his own decisions that have led to the killing of that person. And even though luck was involved, a lot of people drink and drive and reach home safely, he has to take a huge chunk of cost and bear it on his shoulders because he chose to drink, which is perfectly legal and perhaps promoted culturally in the West. Surely intoxication might not be promoted, but drinking is very much related to intoxication. Considering that if you promote drinking, obviously the percentage of the people who probably might be intoxicated will also likely to increase. That is the standard way of looking at the things. In this regard, if you view that, you will find that this person is responsible for his own uh, is held responsible for his own actions that result from the drinking. And he may have drunk many times. But of course, in that one unfortunate incident, his drinking led to the killing or led to the death of certain individuals. You cannot distance that person's actions from his overall behavior. If he is in jail, that is because of a series of actions that he to himself took. Similarly, same goes for the West. Why is there this trend to separate all the good actions from the West and attribute it to the West? But all the negative actions are thought of as being imposed from the elites or the people that the Western people believe to be responsible for these big mistakes or what they believe to be big mistakes. Take, for example, the immigration. Whenever a large number of people from the other countries come to another country, they may have two kinds of impacts. Firstly, a lot of people who come legally by visa, in many of the cases, it is checked whether they have necessary skills or whether they are affluent enough. This is a way in which West tries to benefit from these people, either through their skills or through their money, which they use to get a chance to stay in these countries. So it is not some sort of a charitable behavior. It is specifically done so that people in these countries, in the Western countries, could benefit from the set of these people. And they did benefit. If you look at the terms of the industries that are present in the West, and if you even ask the people who are employing these people of high value or high skills in their own organizations and companies, you will find a consensus. Of course, people who have high talent, they contribute to the output in the countries in which they go. This is not a controversial position. It is made or made to appear as controversial, but it's clearly not. Now, what is about the question is about the lowly skilled laborers or lowly skilled people who are entering into the West, or the poor people. When a lot of these people enter into the West, considering the fact that they don't have much assets, they actually occupy the bottommost position, and they shift the people in the West to a higher position. Money in a country itself has a relative value. Consider this fact that no country in this world has a completely freely floating currency, because even if the currency is freely pegged, it's not pegged, it's free. There is a central bank, and that central bank decides the interest rates. In US, it is done by Federal Reserve. So they have some control over the value of the dollar. That means that there is some value that the money has in the in that country's own boundary, which means that if you have more people coming from poorer countries which do not have asset, they will they have a great probability of invariably leading to the people who are existing who are poor in existing case in these countries to switch to a higher social or financial class. The reason why it will occur is because these people will take up some certain services at a lower cost, thus decreasing the value of these services or the cost of these services. Which means that a person, for example, who was now having certain kind of assets and was not able to afford these services will now be able to afford these services, because the prices of these services will go down, or the cost of these services will go down, because the number of the people supplying these services has gone up. Now, of course, there is some balance to be had there. But this was one of the reasons why Western people preferred immigration. Notice that there is a good work stand work good number of work related laws in the West. Now, the good working conditions in an organization also means that the organization suffers on output in many cases. For example, if there is a person who's working in, let's say, Sri Lanka or India or Thailand or Myanmar, and he's working till 12 hours, he's producing an output for 12 hours. But if you want good working conditions in this US, and you believe that you should be made to work only 8 hours, then you're working for those 4 hours less. Now, granted that 4 hours productivity might not be same as the initial 8 hours, but it is some productivity. So will you manage to sustain in the competition where some person in another, where some the population of another country is working for 12 hours in abysmal working conditions, while you choose to work for only 8 hours in good working conditions? Of course, you have to have some kind of immigration and some other measures in order to compete. Otherwise, you will not be able to produce good enough output, and there will be a wealth transfer from your country to these countries, because they are willing to work more and they are willing to live in low cost living conditions. These people come in these countries, and this is how these countries can retain their wealth. Now, this person who is working in Thailand, now is same person is in US, and he's not demanding high working conditions. He's getting low wages, and that is how your services cost is being reduced. In this way, you're keeping inflation low, and you are trying to increase your social status by not actually contributing more in economy, or now not uh, doing more work, but simply based on the fact that you have now more poor people, which increases your relative financial position in that world. And because the value of the currency is always dependent on this relativity or the differential gap that exists between the poor people and the rich people, of course, the value of the currency will become more, because the cost of the services will become less due to these things. So it was not charity. It was not due to some philosophical wrong assumption of belief that the people had. It was because this immigration was benefiting them. Now they feel that the immigration is not benefiting them. And instead of just accepting that at that time we were for you because we were just benefiting from immigration, and now we are not benefiting, they try to make it as some sort of a philosophical or cultural argument. And the reason why this cultural argument is often made is so that they can have the moral high ground. Otherwise, they will have to accept that the reason why the immigration was allowed in the earlier eras or earlier decades was simply because it was of economic and social benefit to the Westerners. This is not a very moral position that one can take if he has an ego and he does not want to accept that it was because of greed. Now let us watch the video further.
Reminded about this question while recently thinking about the passing of Pope Francis. I recalled how once, while apologizing to indigenous peoples for all the horrible things Christians did to them throughout the centuries, the late Pope declared that, quote, never again can the Christian community allow itself to be infected by the idea that one culture is superior to others. This widely held position is very dangerous, specifically
This is where he is making a very strange argument. Now we will discuss whether the argument given by Pope Francis was good, but why it was made. It was made because people who went on to colonize these other countries and went on this imperial conquest did believe that their culture was better. And based on that feeling of superiority, they did atrocities towards the people of the other cultures. Because in the end, they believe that this will justify itself. Because they will create a better civilization out of them. They will humanize them. They will civilize them. That is something that even right does not disagree with. This is not something even the racist don't disagree with. Only is that they believe that it was correct. So if you believe that is correct, that is a different argument altogether. But otherwise, Pope Francis, who does regard atrocities committed against other cultures as atrocities, argued this point because his argument was simply based on this notion that you cannot use self-justification. A culture cannot self-justify that it is better than the other cultures. Because we have seen that the Western culture did that and then did commit atrocities, which we are now realizing and which people on the right also realize. Then it means that the standard that we should adopt is that we should refrain from doing this because we already tried and it didn't work and it didn't make us the West more moral. So if it didn't make it more moral, then there is you shall know them by their fruits. You shall know which argument is good or not bad by at least some examination of the fruit that it brings. So this is the reason why Francis made that argument. And it's perfectly valid if you accept that there were some sort of atrocities that were committed by the people in the West towards the people of the other cultures. And part of the reason why this was this was thought of as justified was because they believed that they were of superior race. You can look at the various ways in which the blacks which were shipped to the US were described as. Not only that was wrong, it was in error. It was in a grave biological error. And it was used in some sort as a justification why people, white people, should have a sort of a control or a master slave ownership, master slave relationship with the people who were coming from these countries, African countries. This was because the people who were the whites or the slave owners or the actual fully human, and the people who were coming from the African tribes were not fully human. They were not accustomed to the varied cultural practices that the Western people had. They were not sensitive enough to the higher cultural forms like art, like music, like science, like discovery, invention, and all of those things which we now know to be false. At least in the art forms, we know that it surely is false. And while there is some argument that is made by the people from the alt-right, or whatever you call them, that there is a difference in appreciation of inventions or discoveries or science, science does not form part of the culture as much as art, language, music, and dance do. And this was a commonly held opinion. Science is relegated to a simple category which is related to education, while it's the art that is the bigger descriptor of the culture, and it has been. It is not some sort of brainwashing. It has been since the time immemorial. This is the reason why in so-called civilized societies or their art forms are given more importance. And this is exactly what even the church did. Now we move on and play the video more.
because it leads to relativism and the abnegation of truth. The problem is that for most Western people today, the
This is again some sort is very misleading. He's saying that it leads to relativism. and it does not give proper value to truth. It means that people are not interested in truth. If you adopt this standard, then you shy away from the truth every time because the standard precludes you from accepting the truth. But this is not the only place where this argument is made. From where this argument came, let us revisit history that he does not lay down to you. This argument comes from a prior argument which sought to equalize men of various social classes by arguing that they were equal, which came from many places, but French Revolution. But there's another point here. Let's leave this. But what about feminism? So, this idea that men and women are to be considered as equal, or there should be no classification of superiority based on the gender. Why all that also does not fall? If we can make a distinction between the different cultures because of the different way they act, or different values or principles that they have, or the way they present themselves, then the same argument can be made to classify one gender as superior than the other gender. Will the people in the West accept it? Of course they don't. Of course they didn't. Remember, feminism came before this argument and this critique of multiculturalism, or even before multiculturalism. If you look at the starting date of feminism, when the feminism was actually there was not enough multiculturalism that these people who are now objecting to it would feel objection to it. So why did they accept that? Why didn't they rise at that time and say that we stand for the truth? Men and women are different. And of course one can be superior to other. Let's discuss that. We are the free speech advocates. Why we want to shame those people who want to point out distinctions and differences or want to claim that men are superior? For example, why not have that debate? The reason is because the women were not construed as undesirables. Women were desirables. So there, of course, truth was not important. But the immigrants are undesirable. This is the reason why truth is more important. And this truth is not truth, of course. There are a lot of lies that we will look as we lies or misleading statements that we will go through in this video and many videos that probably will make on this topic. And of course, the lies that were perpetuated by the slave owners against the blacks that we now know were lies. So it is not that there is no historical context in which all of this is happening. And this context is generated from the West itself, not from the East, not from the African countries, not from the Middle East. This is the bigger lie. What you see what the West does in all of these deceptions, or these Western academics, or these Western people who side with these bizarre sort of tendencies do, is that they say that they are not hating on the other people. But when they do want to hate, they bring forth a principle that they don't use in other circumstances and say that they don't want to do that, but they're guided by that principle. I don't want to say that other cultures are bad, but it's the truth that compels me. It's the truth that compels me to say that I will not say a trans woman as I will not refer to a trans woman as a woman. It's not that I hate that person. It's just that I cannot speak what is a lie. And we know that there is a biological truth that the men are this and women are this. Why that was not used during the time of feminism? Why didn't people rise up and say that, of course, men and women do different things, they present themselves differently, they do differently. There are studies that show that they value different things. The moral compass is different to some extent at the very least, so there can be one superior gender than the other gender could be inferior. And they are not doing this even now. They want to keep this argument to throw away the immigrants, and when the immigrants will be thrown out, and the people of their own race or the people that they like will be left, and the women, of course, then they will again refer to this argument that no, we should believe that all people are equal in the eyes of the Lord, and we should not comment on who is superior and who is inferior. Are you so arrogant that you want to say that some other person who's in whose shoes you are not there is inferior? That is an argument they use against people who probably refer to men as superior than women. This all is very. Now let's consider another thing. Irish. There was a time when Irish were not treated properly. Should we have a discussion on whether Irish or the British? Let's say we are in America, but the British culture is good enough so that they should be able to have a living place in the US. Irish, they were treated very bad in certain areas. Well, I'm not even talking about Irish culture and Romania. Maybe let's probably it forms part of Eastern Europe, so it is not technically Europe. Where do you draw that line? Why don't have those debates? They didn't want to have those debates. That is the reason why they incorporated that standard that we should not call people other people inferior and we should not call ourselves superior. And because it led to many atrocities, in which West had a huge role to play. So of course the burden was to be borne by the West. But when suddenly the people from other races come in or other cultures come in, suddenly it becomes very, very bad. Suddenly it becomes a fight for truth. Is it really a fight for truth? There is something that people should ask themselves.
The word culture conjures up superficial differences, exotic dress or food. In reality, however, cultures are nothing less than entire and distinct worldviews with their own unique sets of right and wrong, often rooted in a religion or philosophy.
This is again a very bizarre argument. You see, here he says that cultures are entire and distinct worldviews. And yes, this can be, it's a definition. Of course, this is a position that can be taken. But why we came to believe that it is the clothes that matter, the fashion and the food? Well, the reason for that was when the West people from the West went into the other cultures, and there was globalization. And this globalization was done by the people in the West. I mean, the West were the pioneers of globalization, and they accept that. They went to the other countries to colonize them. They went to the other countries to conquer them. Countries that were far away and to form one empire on which the sun never sets. This was globalization. Now, suddenly, many of them are against globalization. But the only reason why they are against globalization is because they believe that they will not be in charge of that globalization. Anyways, so this culture, the reason why the cultures were not believed to be entirely and distinct worldviews was because of this morality that was pressed down on the pressed shoved down the throat of the other cultures. See, if there is a culture that is engaged in some practice that a person from the West finds deplorable, then what the people in the West could do is that they believe that that is a distinct worldview. So unless I totally understand that worldview, I cannot criticize this, which is an official, which is a good and a responsible position to take. Because if the cultures are distinct set of worldviews, then you cannot just easily criticize something that you find deplorable in the practice of the other culture, and you cannot stop it easily because it will have ripple effects on the whole system or the whole way that culture is set up. Of course, to be a responsible and mature and a high IQ citizen, not just a dumb person, if you believe that these differences are originating out of distinct worldviews, then you have to go to that worldview, understand it, and then criticize. This is Chesterton fence. So Chesterton fence is now, which is somehow regarded by conservatives as a very good piece of advice, is now suddenly thrown away. It's remarkable how the way the Western mind works. It wants universalism, but it wants universalism only through itself. It's so hilarious. The reason the reason why the cultures were reduced to art, music, food, dress was because it was believed that those cultural differences that were morally deplorable or that were morally different were not actually should not be attributed to culture, should be just viewed as morally wrong and should be stopped. Because they were to be viewed as morally wrong and to be stopped, there was no thought or no normal process of comparison of worldviews required, which were leading out to these changes. So, for example, in a Muslim world, there are certain cultural norms that they have in order to ensure a more family-oriented and virtuous lifestyle. But people in the West didn't want that. They just wanted to criticize it and stop it. So what do? If you say that there's a difference between the culture, then you have to argue against this cultural value of modesty, let's say of the woman, that women should retain modesty, and that there should be no sexual displays in the society. When you are arguing, for example, to arguing that women should have the freedom to wear what they want. But if you don't want to do that, you say that it is morally imperative to have this view that women should have the freedom to wear they want. Because in Islam, women cannot wear, because in Islamic societies, women cannot wear skirts, mini skirts. This is a reason why they are wrong. Notice, when you follow this path, you are not viewing Islamic society as a people or their culture as having a distinct worldview, or you are viewing them as more when you're saying these, when you're making it about morality, what you're saying is that there is one common morality that is applicable to all, and Islam is not following it. There is no argument about the culture. You are just saying that the culture is wrong. This allows you to criticize them. This allows you to an make an effort to not fully understand their worldview and to create a sort of negative narrative against them. Because, of course, if it is related to morality, then of course it is bad. It's not emerging from a worldview. So, of course, if it's then it could be argued by people believe in certain sense of morality to believe the actions that have certain sort of moral significance and are present in other societies to be morally repugnant. So there is no discussion of the cultures involved. But if you want to make it about the culture, then there is a different procedure to be followed. If you remove all of these actions that have moral significance, and what remains? Music, art, dance. And this is the reason why cultures are associated with music, art, dance. If there's culture that is doing anything that has moral significance, then of course the moral discussion comes up. And because the moral discussion comes up, and this moral discussion is just literally about that act, then it is not emerging from the entire and distinct worldview. So you are not respecting your own definition. So the reason why this culture became to be just relegated to this very simple idea of the actions or to the music, art, and dance was because all the actions that were considered more with significance, even if they arose from the cultural differences, were judged morally and not culturally. They were not afforded the commonplace practice, a commonplace process, a very judicious and reasonable process that must be followed when you are attacking a certain value that is emerging from a culture. You have to take the culture as a whole and then criticize that value. You cannot take that value or that act in an isolation because you believe that it is emerging from an entirely distinct worldview. So, of course, if you believe that the people in Islam who are living in Islamic countries don't have the similar thoughts, don't similar have values, they don't want value similar things as you, then why you chose to criticize them for several decades, mocking or insulting them or insulting their practices? They continue to do that even now. If you look at the videos uh, where any sort of practice, cultural practice of these countries is mentioned, there are tons of people in of the West in the comment section who are attacking those values, who are attacking those cultural differences. In fact, there's a person, like for example, this person writes, what multiculturalism boils down to is that you can praise any culture in the world except Western culture, and you cannot blame any culture in the world except Western culture. This quote is by Thomas Sowell. This is nothing but a lie. If you look at any place, and this is even before this multicultural culturalism argument started, literally say very critical pieces by the academics and by the normal people of the values and the cultural values that are present in other countries. It's literally everywhere. It is found in the YouTube under the YouTube videos where some people will be explaining their cultural value, and there are tons and tons of the people in the West, of the West that are criticizing those. This is even in the countries that they consider, these many people in the West consider to be high advanced, like Japan or China or Korea, South Korea. Have you not seen it? Have you not seen people in the West criticizing other cultures? Even though those cultures are thousands of miles away, if you don't want, if you are against those cultures, don't go there. But still, they were critical of them. Academics have written about other cultures, and this has been widely shared in their universities. So they brought these cultures into the discussion, and now they are for criticizing them. And now they are saying, "Oh, we cannot criticize them." You can. You always were criticizing. So what they cannot criticize? Well, the left argued, as it has always argued, that minorities should be given special protections. If there is a person who is coming from Saudi Arabia to the West, or from some Pakistan or some other countries to the West, he is in a minority and he's afforded certain protections. These protections are not only just afforded to the immigrants. Remember, these are afforded to the white lesbians, white gays, white women as well. Were you always against these protections? Are you against these protections for white women as well? You see where this problem starts. The problem starts or the problem originates because white women are believed to be desirable and a brown immigrant from these countries considered to be undesirable. So the white men and women don't want, in many of these cases, to have a standard that benefits these brown immigrants. But they were using that same standard for themselves. If a white woman is afforded a certain additional protection because she's weak, and this funny thing is, this was something that conservatives want. The women should be afforded additional protections because people who are weak and who are living in a society should gain certain additional privileges or protections. And the same apply when the left comes and says, oh yes, women should be afforded protections, and so do these immigrants. I mean, they are in minority, they are living in terrible work conditions. Why should not they get it? Trans women should get it. And suddenly people get angry. The women who are feminists also become angry because they didn't want all of these people to have those protections. You're seeing this is because they don't want to share those privileges with certain people. They want to share it with certain people, so they adopt a standard that we should protect the weak, or weak should have higher privileges. And when they don't want to share these privileges with other people or give them those privileges, then they say, "Oh, why these people are giving additional protections? Are we not equal?" They believe that we are not equal. They want special protections. We believe that we are equal, forgetting that people in their own societies, of their own skin color, and their own culture, demanded special protections based on multitude of factors: sexual orientation, religion, gender. Suddenly, it becomes about race, and you don't want you don't want them to get special protections. Isn't that xenophobia or racism? So what is behind this? You have to really ask. Is this just a shock value? Or is this actual xenophobia? Of course it appears to be xenophobia. It appears to be racism. Otherwise, if this was a simple principle to be followed, it should have been followed throughout. In all cases, even against other whites, even against white women. Why it was not followed then?
Wrong, often rooted in a religion or philosophy. Indeed, for some thinkers, such as T.S. Eliot, culture and religion are inextricably linked and, quote, different aspects of the same thing, he wrote, adding, culture may even be described simply as that which makes life worth living. No culture can appear or develop except in relation to a religion. We can see a religion as the whole way of life of a people, his emphasis, from birth to the grave, from morning to night, and even in sleep. And that way of life is also its culture. That's from T.S. Eliot's book, Notes Towards the Definition of Culture. Similarly, for Anglo-French historian Hilaire Belloc, quote, cultures spring from religions. Ultimately, the vital force which maintains any culture is its philosophy, its attitude toward the universe. The decay of a religion involves the decay of the culture corresponding to it. We see this most clearly in the breakdown of Christendom today. He made these observations nearly a century ago. What, one wonders, would he say today? At any rate, the
Now notice, this is where you see the common deception. He quotes a person who died in 1953 as one of the supporters of his argument. And that person who's died in 1953, probably this quote would represent his observations made between 1880, when he was 10 years old. Probably that is the time we can say that person starts making these observations, to 1930s, 1920s or 1930s. At that time, he's saying that there's a breakdown in Christendom. He's citing that person. But when he will begin to criticize Islam or immigrants, he'll say that they are against the secular values or the liberal values, all the values that came from liberalism that people in the West hold. Do you see this? What this person is doing is he's saying that these people from other races, other cultures, they are not in alignment with the Enlightenment values. And sure, they are not. They didn't have an enlightenment that was as severe as was in the West. In fact, probably one can argue that enlightenment occurred in the West only. These people in other countries also face things similar, but not to that extent. So of course they don't have it. But if he is against that, he wants to retain these enlightenment values. Why is promoting Christianity and Christendom? You see why that problem is coming. This problem is coming because he doesn't want to take any responsibility. And this problem was similar. You can see the similar problem in this commentator. So he starts with a comment 410 people like this as of now. But then he ends, Western cultures remain Western cultures as long as they adhere to Judeo-Christian values. And somewhere else he writes, for example, Western means productive contributions to philosophy, science, medicine, literature, art, and technology. Check the Nobel Prizes and see where they come from, Western nations. Western also means high quality infrastructure, building, manufacturing, innovation, education, entrepreneurs, working environments, legal systems, and method of politics. Compare cities and who built them. If a city is purchased with oil money, then those who design and build it will not be those with only money from oil, but people hired from Western nations. You see, what is the problem? This all is a result of Enlightenment and post Christian philosophies. They might have emerged from Christianity, but they were in opposition to it. French Revolution. Let's see when French Revolution occurred. Do you see these dates? It's late 1700s. During till 1800, when the 1800s had just started, there's already all of these values that were there in the society. So all of these infra, entrepreneurs, invention, education, working environment, building, these are the product of the liberal society. This is when the Judeo-Christian values are already in decline. Who is saying that? Not me. The same person being quoted by the OP who is referring to in support of his argument. So if the Christian breakdown of Christendom did occur in 1920, then why are we attributing building, manufacturing, invention, high quality infrastructure, entrepreneurs, working environments, legal systems, all of that which occurred after 1920 to Judeo-Christian values? He's saying Western cultures as long they adhere to Judeo-Christian values. So this person must be wrong, right? Hilaire Belloc must be wrong. So who is right? Hilaire Belloc or Kevin Fitzmaurice Everett? You see what is happening. If you criticize Judeo-Christian values that existed, they were very conservative and existed during the 1800s or before 1800s, these people will say, "Oh, but now we have changed. We went against those values. We became more moral. We had our own liberalism, enlightenment. We stopped slavery of men. We made all men equal, brotherhood, egalitarianism." And when you criticize these Western morality, they will begin citing Judeo-Christian values. So when you say, oh, there are a lot of issues in the West, feminism is there, a lot of things that are very socially undesirable. There's no meritocracy. Affirmative action is there in the West. Then suddenly these people will turn, oh, but Westernism is about Judeo-Christian values. Am I right, sir? Judeo-Christian values are not about all of these things. We don't believe in feminism. We don't believe in sexual liberation also, although if we are arguing against Islamic people, Muslim people, then we will say that, oh, we provide sexual liberation. We don't just kill people because they are not wearing proper clothes or they are not being modest or that they are having sex before marriage. We are civilized people. We have sexual liberty. They don't have it. They are very conservative and cruel and hard. Let's see these comments. No, not all cultures are not equal. Some are cruel, intolerant, and deadly. These cultures ritually kill people for exercising sexual freedom. Okay, but the sexual freedom, that is in a lot of wrong. How is it good? That is resulting in decay of civilization. Oh, but Judeo-Christian values. Western cultures remain Western cultures as long as they adhere to Judeo-Christian values. Why are you putting all of these feminist blames on us? We want to practice Christian values. Standards do exist, morals do exist, virtues do exist. You can live up to them or not. That is what happens in Islamic societies, not in the Western societies. Western societies allow to you commit certain specific vices, succumb to certain vices. And that is culturally allowed also. You see, this distinction allows them not to be criticized for anything. You cannot criticize them for religious extremism because they are secular now. And you cannot criticize them for secularism because they were once religious extremists themselves. Crusades were there.
In the breakdown of Christendom today, he made these observations nearly a century ago. What, one wonders, would he say today?
And if you agree with him, why are you defending the secular world that exists today? He'll do that. Let's watch this video more.
At any rate, the point here is that cultures bring much more than, say, the convenience of having Thai cuisine down the street. Which leads to another important fact. All those cultural traits prized by the modern West today, religious freedom, tolerance, humanism, gender, as in male and female only, equality, did not develop in a
Now he lists all those things. that were instrumental in breakdown of Christendom. Equality. So you believe in equality of male and female, but you don't believe in equality of cultures? I mean, isn't it surprising? So you believe that males behave differently and females behave differently, and we should believe them to be equal. Suddenly, you are not no longer against truth. So Pope Francis says all these cultures are equal, and you suddenly get, oh, that is standing against the truth. But you say, male and female are equal. That is not standing against truth. If Pope Francis says, nah, I don't believe this one culture is superior to other culture, you suddenly become angry. He's going against the truth. He's preaching relativism. But someone says, men are superior, I think, to women. We believe in equality of men and women. That is a minimal standard you have to have a civilized society. How can you say otherwise? He is now standing up for those very things that were resulting from the breakdown of Christendom. You see how he's playing both sides. He wants truth to be inserted when we are evaluating a Somali or a poor Iraqi immigrant, a male who doesn't have anything. But we cannot use that when we are evaluating a rich woman, white woman. Can you see? It is nonsensical from both the perspective of the right and the left. The left argues that we must defer to the person who is weak, but we are not doing that. And the right argues that we must look at the actions and follow a consistent standard. He's not doing that. He's standing for the male female equality, but what he's criticizing the very society that produced this idea that cultures are equal. So cultures can be different. But cultures we have to evaluate cultures strictly and rationally. Agreed. So why don't you evaluate gender critically and rationally? Why? Why? And it's not just that. Tolerance. He says
Tolerance,
tolerance is
humanism,
value
gender,
evaluated.
as
He says tolerance, but he says gender. There's male and female. All the civil societies believed that.
in male and female only.
So tolerance means that you should be tolerant to other genders as well. Because all the societies and all the cultures throughout the history believe that there were only two genders, on a third gender that you can say classify as others. So how is this a Western thing? You see what he's doing? Because he's not agreeing with the transgenders. He says gender male and female is what the West proposes. But the West is only proposed the transgenders and these bifurcation of classes. So he's taking only those things to be produced from the West, which he considered good, to be produced from the West. Rest all of the other things, they are not from the West, even though they are from the West. I mean, who is talking about the transgenders? Is it not the people from the West only? Do you think that the people in Somalia are talking about uh, transgenders and even gays and lesbians? They're very much worried about them. It's so hilarious.
equality did not develop in a vacuum, but are rather byproducts of Christian principles and ethics.
But transgenderism is not a byproduct of Christian ethics because we don't agree with the Christian transgenderism. But male and female equality, even though there's no mention in the Bible and any Christian philosophy that existed, women didn't even have property rights under Christendom. But male and female equality and male and female and this all of these things, they have originated from Christendom. Christendom has only originated good values in the West. If there's any bad value that has emerged in the West, that is not from Christendom. And this is self-justification, exactly what Pope Francis criticized.
Which over the course of some 2,000 years have had a profound influence on Western epistemology, society, and of course, culture.
And over these 2000 years, it has not remained the same. If you bring a person from 2000 years ago, from the time of the Christ into here, or even during the 1800s, he will call you liberal, he will call you degenerate. Just go on and you just look at the statements by the founding fathers of the Christianity or the very important people in Christianity till 1000 BC. And tell me whether they are not very radical and whether they will be adjusted as these people will be believed to be adjusted in the Western societies. So why this series? I mean, it's interesting.
While these values are now taken for granted and seen as universal, there's a reason why they were born and nourished in Christian, not Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, or Confucian nations.
See, this is where the problem is. He says that these values, people say that these values are universal. The reason why these values were said to be universal is so that people from the Western countries could shove down the throat of other countries and say that, yeah, these values are universal and you better agree with them. And you don't have any claim to argue that you should have different values. Take, for example, the gender equality thing. The reason why the people in the West often are criticizing the people from the other societies when they are not following the principles of equality. And you can see a lot of people doing. Conservatives do that, liberals do that. Why they do that? I mean, these people, they want to live in a certain different kind of societies. They don't want to believe that men and women are equal. They want to believe that they have different roles. Christianity also believed certain things about regarding that, just certain centuries ago. Food is a reasonable standard from that perspective, at the very least. So what do Western people say? No, that is immoral. There is a universal moral standard, and these people are not adhering to it. See, when it's about imposing the standard on the other people, it is, yeah, moral standards are universal. Christians used to say that. But when it's about accepting these standards from the other people, then it is not universal. So the person who is living in Africa, he will never realize secularism, or realize religious tolerance, or he will never realize equality, because it is not a universal value. He doesn't have in his heart this respect for these values. So why are you forcing him to follow these? Why did you force him to follow these values in his own country? Was that not wrong? Was it not like feeding a lion a grass? So when you are forcing, you develop the standard that it is universal to be able to force him, to shame him, to have these NGOs going in these other countries and spreading these values, to have the activism in these countries by the people who are white, in which they talk about the practices of these countries that are not aligned with Western values. Literally, there are people in the US who believe that other countries who have a very moral repugnant practices should be attacked and bombed. That was based on universalism. But now suddenly you say, universalism, they don't have these values. We develop these values. They will not have these values. So you should not have, mister. Shove down their throats these values. Why were you trying to make a lion eat grass? Because you wanted to make him eat grass. You told. Of course, you doesn't refer to him. You adopted a standard that all lions also eat grass because I am a sheep and I eat grass. But now because that was resulting in your benefit. It allowed you to shove down the morality down the throat of the other people and the civilizations without feeling sad or why am I doing it? Aren't these people different? Without having that thought in the back of your mind or without compromising on the self belief about the morality that you possessed. But now it is no longer advantageous, so suddenly you want to limit it. I mean, isn't it all a result of consequentialism? Every standard that the West adopts is the one that benefits itself.
Even if one were to accept the widely entrenched narrative that the Enlightenment is what led to Western progress, it is alone telling that this Enlightenment arose in Christian as opposed to any of the many non-Christian.
This is where see, he says, even if one accepts, you accept or not, you tell whether you accept. He's playing both sides. Do you accept that it came from Christianity? If yes, it came from Christianity, then the problems that came from the Enlightenment also have to be attributed from Christianity. Why did Christianity result in only good things coming from the Enlightenment? If Christianity wants to take praise for the values in Enlightenment that were developed during the Enlightenment that were good, it also has to take the blame for the values that developed during Enlightenment that were bad. Like French Revolution. Let's see what French Revolution did. After the French Revolution, what all happened, right? The civil constitution of clergy made them employees of states, established rates of pay, and developed a system for electing priests and bishops. Pope Pius VI and many French Catholics objected to this since it denied the authority of Pope over the French Church. In October, 30 bishops wrote a declaration denouncing the law, further fueling opposition, when clergy were required to swear loyalty to the civil constitution in November. It split the church between the 24% who complied and the majority who refused. This stiffened popular resistance against state interference, especially in the traditionally Catholic areas such as Normandy, Brittany, and the Vendée, where only a few priests took the oath and the civilian population turned against the revolution. The result was state led persecution of refractory clergy. many of whom were forced into exile, deported, or executed. Why don't you take a position whether this was correct thing? Who was correct in this scenario? Deliberately does not want to take a position in this video. Because if he takes a position, then he exposes himself. If he takes a position that what the state did was wrong, then enlightenment was bad. It literally stood on the killing of clergy. And he's making pro-Christian videos and all in his channel. It's not just about Western liberalism, it's pro-Christianity. And if he sides with the Christians here, then he has to side with all the extremism that the Christian society had during that time, which, of course, many liberals would have already discussed, so I need not discuss it right now. So you take one position, right? I mean, if the state decides, you cannot collect money from the people, was it good or bad? If it was good, if that enlightenment was good, if all of these things were good, right? Then these were specifically in opposition to the church and the Catholic Church, the power that the Catholic Church had at that time, or the church had at that time. So it was in opposition to Christianity. It was not a result of Christianity. Secularism after came by opposing the church, and it faced opposition from the church and the Christians. It was not coming out of Christianity like suddenly a pope one day decides, actually I've read the Bible and it feels that we need to be secular. And suddenly secularism was born. Christians resisted it, church resisted it, and it failed. And this is the reason why it came into being. Muslims also had these kind of revolutions, but they succeeded. They didn't fail. And Turkey had it. So from where this argument is coming is surprising, huh?
Nations that I just mentioned. All this is missed by those ignorant of the spiritual and intellectual roots of Western civilization.
This is all just talk. There's nothing substantial behind it.
Many secular people in the West arrogantly see themselves as the culmination of all human history, enlightened thinkers who have left all cultural and religious baggage behind, with concern only for that which matters, namely the material. For them, all religions and cultures are superficialities that will eventually be shed off by all the peoples of the world. The non-Western world, according to this way of thinking, is destined to develop just like the West, which is no longer seen as a distinct culture, but rather as the end point of all cultures. The folly of such thinking is especially on sharp display in the context of Islam. And
Now, see, this is again where he's misleading. You see, this argument that all the cultures will become like the Western culture was not based on this highly moral or philosophical reasoning. It is from arguments made by different philosophers, especially liberal philosophers, which have argued that liberalism is the correct position. And all societies will eventually turn liberal due to various factors like information. When uh, because many of these traditions or customs or things that are held deeply by the people, which were also held by the Western people and the white people, were held due to the large amount of gap, or various gaps in the power and the position and the information that certain people held and the other people held. So, for example, the atheists used to argue that now in this information age, everyone will become atheist, or many majority atheists will become a dominant position because they will see how stupid the religion is, which included Christianity, because now they have access to information. Now the priest can no longer fool them about the miracles. Liberals believed in something similar. They believed that as the societies and the traditions change and the world becomes more successful and technologically advanced, and we get rid of things like diseases, and we get rid of things of like information gap, and we get rid of things like uh, monarchy, then or hierarchy, extreme hierarchy, then automatically the people should leave these dogmas and these bad practices behind. This was a this was a completely religiously neutral argument, and in their mind it applied in the West. So why it should not apply in other places as well? Well, this was not done because culture will become all the cultures will become equal and there is no cultural superficiality. This was not in relation to any of these. It was in relation to the improved standards of living, which will eventually make people less afraid and less dependent on God, access to the information that they will allow them to see that is all is result of science, right? And not miracles. Miracles are doubtful, and all the things happen because of the various physical laws and result because of cause and effect. And many miracles are just straight up lies. So all of this will weaken the religious dogma. And certainly there are many things that will weaken the cultural dogma, like when they intermingle. And all of these were not wrong in certain sense, but they were incomplete. The issue is not, remember, the issue is not that the people from other cultures will not accept it. The issue was that the people from the West wanted to force it upon other cultures based on their own understanding, on their own development of these values. This is where the problem arose. They didn't let these cultures have their own moments. And the reason why they didn't let these cultures have their own moments because they wanted those specific liberal values with which they agreed, and not the liberal values that can be generated in other cultures. Because remember, the liberalism is a very strange word. It no longer means liberty. It never meant liberty in the first instance. It means some specific positions that certain people like that can be generally qualified to be associated with the more liberal societies. Certain positions that the liberal have are not even liberal, but they want to have these positions. So it is nothing to do with the liberty, and this is the reason why this problem arose. Westerners wanted to mold every culture in their own image. This was because this was a result of dehumanization of the other people, which is exactly the reason why they hate multiculturalism now. Because certain people realized that they failed and they didn't want to live with these people. It was not because of certain feeling of, oh, cultural baggage is lost and religious baggage is lost, and now all and everything should come to one point. Sure, it would come to one point, but that point may not be the Western point, and Western people should accept it because that is what tolerance is. If there is some Muslim who is coming and teaching about something and they are really tolerant, then they can choose to adopt his values. See, liberalism meant that you take good from wherever you can find. It didn't mean a specific set of values that you should have. The very fact that these people are upset about that is because liberalism was projected wrongly. It was always about cultural superiority. It was presented as accepting those values that were right. It is about accepting those values that are right. You should not be afraid. Let's say that tomorrow the inclusion of Muslims in the Western societies leads to a society in which we realize that yes, there are certain cultural norms that have to be encoded in the conduct, in the legal sphere. Then that will be the position. That position liberals have to accept. Because if you look at the liberalism, it means that there would be changes. A big liberalism, it means that there would be changes. There will be a lot of positions that people will adopt. There are a lot of people that positions that people will reject. And this is a continuous process. Of course, that continuous process will evolve over time as certain information comes from other cultures, other people, and other people because they have a different, distinct set of experiences. And you should evolve. But if you say no, liberalism actually means that we have to be secular. We have to be maintain equality. But remember, equality only in case of man or woman or gays and lesbians, but not in the case of transgenders. Then this is a specific ideology. Then this is not liberalism. It's saying that my liberalism means these specific set of values and I will impose them. I will stand by them. Then how you're different in Saudi Arabia? Or how you're different in the Muslim people, Muslim nations who want to put down Sharia? You have your own values and you want them to be remain in your own countries. And you want to ensure that they remain the cornerstone and the basis by which all things are judged. And even if they cause something wrong, then it is a collateral damage. But when the same is done by the Muslim countries, then you suddenly say that is bad. And you say that you are liberal and they are not. Liberal, if you were actually liberal, you will look and analyze these different ideas with a liberal bent of mind. If you already said that my liberalism entails X, Y, Z, A, B, C, some 26 or hundreds of different ideas altogether, and if any one of these ideas fall, then liberalism has ended. If you want to believe, have that belief, then it is not liberalism. That is liberalism plus 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 plus. It's already coming with certain things that other person has to agree. If he doesn't agree, then he's not a liberal. So you're making him, forcing him manipulatively to adopt to certain positions that he may disagree with by saying that they are part and parcel of the liberal world. What if, let's say, a person in the West does not agree to secularism? Will you throw him away in Antarctica? Let's say he's a white native person. So why would you do that with the Muslim who does not believe in secularism? And if you're doing that, how you are tolerant? So let's say there's a person, there are people in the world who argue for monarchy. What will you do with them? Let's have an interesting discussion regarding that. And if you're not, why you're upset if some Muslim also wants to establish monarchy in the West? You are not liberal. You're using enlightenment only as to avoid certain criticisms that you know could be levied against the Christendom.
Muslims, who in this new paradigm are seen as embryonic Westerners. Whatever a Muslim may say, calls for jihad, hate for infidels, surely deep down inside he values secularism and appreciates the need to practice Islam privately, respect religious freedom, gender equality, and so on. So
Notice how he mentioned gender equality. Now let us look what happened in the West. When the feminism was there in the West, there was openly hate articles against men. Why didn't they rise then? If you look at the established major publications that were there in the West, like BBC, like NYT, they do contain articles that are pure misandry. And this has not existed now only. This has existed from long time back. So were there no sources from where hatred was being spread against men by the feminists and by even the normal people? Were they not categorizing men into one some sort of class and making some statements that were generalizing? So why didn't you fight against them? Why didn't you say, "Oh, these people are crushing our liberal fiber. We should do something against them. We know that this has failed." Why you are not alarmed? Again, because that was done by the women, white women, who were considered desirables, and the immigrants are not desirable. This is the reason why some hatred is accepted, other hatred is not accepted. You want Muslims to follow gender equality, but now there are many criticisms of gender equality and its dogma. But at that time, you want to revert back to the space of Judeo-Christian values. Let's say that there is an there are a lot of people, Muslims, who are doing that. They're criticizing this gender equality doctrine, an effect by which they show that it is anti-family, it is bad, it is leading to a lot of bad things to men. False cases are occurring because of false cases and accusations. They are directly the result of this feminist movement, which are grounded in the so-called gender equality. And West has to take the blame for it. It wants to take the praise for all the infrastructure that it developed because it is originated from the West and it spread to other places and it is in the West and it is an outcome of these values only. So let's say a Muslim is criticizing those, and we came to this realization that the gender equality is bad, and it has led to a lot of harm, especially to men, and it is a result of a lot of these things. Now, what should we do with the West? So, what should we do with the Westerners? Should we treat them as barbarians, and should we say that their culture is inferior? Will he accept that? There needs to be a greater discussion. First of all, we have to fix the responsibility of the Westerners, and they have to accept a position that yes, this is what the West means. They cannot flip flop. And once they accept that position, or even if they don't accept it, we should put the blame of all of those wrongs on them. Like they put it on Muslims and other people. Like he's saying, you can praise any culture in the world except the Western culture. And you cannot blame any culture in the world except Western culture. Actually, you're not able to blame the Western culture because they always play this game of manipulation. So let's say Western culture led to gender equality. He's saying that. And it's bad. Muslims are not accepting that. Agreed. Now let's say we come to a conclusion that the gender equality was bad. So maybe we should now start attacking or criticizing Westerners and Western culture because not only it did it practice it in its own borders, it forced it on other countries as well. It's very strange.
so goes this thinking. Thus he is made in our image, except of course we forget the roots of our image. In reality,
That women are made in their image, God's image.
the Muslim has his own unique and ancient worldview and set of principles, his own culture, which in turn prompt behavior that is deemed radical by Western standards, which
There's a
are
lot of behavior by the Westerners that is also deemed radical by the Westerners. and should have been deemed radical, but is not deemed radical because one Westerner is saving the skin of the other Westerner. You saw that with the Trump. When there was an assassination attempt on Trump, right? A lot of people in the white people who were celebrating that or downplaying that. So, are they not civilized, Raymond? Just now, I just came to this realization that a lot of people in the Western world who did not do not agree to fair elections. Hmm. Maybe it's a result of the Judeo-Christian mentality because of course they are also originating from that Judeo-Christian values, right? I mean, they are coming from Enlightenment values. Enlightenment has come from Judeo-Christian values. Sam Harris is also a product of Enlightenment. He has said many bad things that may be construed as an end of democracy, and this is established systems of election in the West. So Christianity, it has a lot of bad things itself. Let's discuss that. I will make a video on that.
Are falsely assumed to be universal standards. As T.S. Eliot, who obviously gave these questions much thought, wrote, quote, ultimately, antagonistic religions must mean antagonistic cultures, and ultimately, religions cannot be reconciled. Portraying
And this was also required to have been told to those cultures where the Christians went, sort of for doing evangelism. There are a lot of Christians who are doing evangelism in the African countries. Why don't we tell them that this evangelism is coming from a culture that is openly hostile to the traditions that you hold? Remember, the same thing occurred in Japan as well. Remember, if at that time this was conveyed to these people, they would have acted in a very bad manner to these priests who were trying to score conversion points. So at that time it was hidden. Now it is being brought again to the light so that the Western societies and the Western people can benefit. Very, very, very moral and ethical.
what at root is a byproduct of Christian teaching as universal, and then applying it to an alien culture like Islam, is doomed to failure.
That is the reason why we need to put blame on Christianity when they sought to evangelize these other cultures, and other cultures were told not to hate these Christians, and that their traditions were under threat by these Christian priests and were eventually dissolved because of Christianity and because Christianity also got help from the state. That should be seen as a grave injustice, should it not be?
The idea that Muslims can be true to their religion and yet naturally fit into Western society is false and built on an equally false premise that
It is
Christianity.
only when you believe that Western societies and the principles held by the Western societies are immutable and are set in stone, which is what the liberals should not believe. And they believe that it is not in set in stone. See, they included gays in that equality doctrine, but they don't want to include the transgenders. So of course, they modify it every time. So it is mutable. What does equality mean? Is mutable. To what sort of classification it applies to is mutable. But suddenly it becomes immutable when a Muslim wants to argue against it. This is what is called fake liberalism, and the only reason why it is adopted is to shield from yourself or your society or your culture from criticism.
Christianity somehow also had to moderate itself to fit into secular society. In fact, Christian principles, which are so alien to Islam, were fundamental to the creation of the West.
Now, he tells something that is straight up lie. He says that Christian principles led to the Enlightenment. That is not true. Christians also didn't believe in male-female equality. Now he says, "Oh, but all are crafted in God's image." That is the reason behind why we treat men and women equal. That is also not true. Remember, even now, first of all, Christians don't treat men and women equally.
So, what then of multiculturalism? This word of the West. So, what then of multiculturalism? This word that the West is supposed to continue celebrating and embracing wholeheartedly. As seen, behind it is the idea that all cultures are equal, and none, certainly not Christian or Western culture, is superior to others. Again, to quote the dearly departed Pope. In
If you allow the ideas to come from actual base, then the idea behind all of this should be, the base should be, that if we saw inequality in behavior of certain populations or certain groups of people, then we should be allowed to assort them or grade them in levels of superiority or inferiority, not just cultures, everything.
in reality, multiculturalism is another euphemistic way of undermining and replacing the truths of a religion and its culture.
Like gender equality. But now he considers gender equality to be part or emanating out of Christianity because he wants to argue against Islam, which does not believe in gender equality.
Namely Christianity, with relativism. Earlier Western peoples understood that capitulating to a foreign culture was tantamount to suicide.
People in all kinds of societies, in Asian societies, believed and knew that capitulating to feminism and other standards of other ideologies resulted in suicide. But they still did it. And they are now imposing it on Islam. You see, they are not afraid of suicide. They are afraid of suicide by immigrants. It's xenophobia.
Thus, and to quote again from T.S. Eliot, quote, "It is inevitable that we should, when we defend our religion, be at the same time defending our culture, and vice versa."
And then they should have defended against the liberals and the progressives. They didn't. Now they adopt many of the principles that liberals and feminists espouse, and they enforce that on other cultures as well. So why are you quoting T.S. Eliot? As if he holds any relevance now.
We are obeying the fundamental instinct to preserve our existence.
No, you are obeying your fundamental instinct to view other people as danger, the societies as dangerous, which is not the only instinct that preserves the existence. You got rid of, or you argued against, or you removed the other instincts which preserves the existence of the people because you thought that they were not morally good. And you developed certain practices and principles in order to safeguard your existence, if you did, because you thought of those instincts as being morally repugnant. But you don't want to do that with Islam because, of course, it is coming from those people who you consider to be undesirables. This is the reason why you don't want to allow that leniency, which was a norm, to them. It's like treating people who arrive at a class differently, late, differently, affording leniency to some by saying, "Oh, I believe and I know that there are a lot of responsibilities on the people. That is why certain people come late." But in case of other student, college standards must be followed. If there's any problem, then you sort it out at your level. It should not be an excuse to come late to the class, and you punish him, and you develop standards to justify your behavior, discriminatory behavior in either of these cases.
This again is from his book, Notes Towards the Definition of Culture. One anecdote well captures this clash of cultures. After
Which is a self-defeating anecdote, and this is the reason why I want you to look at that carefully.
the British colonial powers banned sati, the Hindu practice of burning a widow alive on her husband's funeral pyre, Hindu priests complained to British Governor Charles James Napier that sati was an important part of their culture, and therefore their right, to which he replied, quote, "Be it so. This burning of widows is your custom. Prepare the funeral pyre. But my nation has also a custom. When men burn women alive, we hang them, and confiscate all their property. My carpenters shall therefore erect gibbets on which to hang all concerned when the widow is consumed. Let us all act according to our national customs." Rather refreshing, right? When men used to talk like that.
You look at his smile. Now let us go back and look at the skirt. Okay, men burn women alive, you hang them. Agreed. Confiscating all their property? From where this is come? Is this some sort of judicial principle? When we confiscate all the property of the murderers and even serial murderers, there's a standard judicial principle. See, if a man burns women alive, then you punish that man. There is a criminal proceeding, and you do that. You don't ask carpenters to erect gibbets. Ideally, Charles James Napier should have said, murdering someone or forcing them to commit something that leads to loss of their lives is bad. There would be a trial, and appropriate people will be punished. But okay, let's say that he threatened them. We will hang you. But from where this confiscate all property came? Why will you confiscate property? That person who is dead, if you have hanged him, will not be able to use the property anyway. It was a way to show two things. First, the state can take any of your, we are in authority, we can take everything that you have. You just give us a reason. This is the reason why, even though a criminal charge is not a reason for confiscation of property, they said, uh, he said that we will confiscate your property. And he's happy. Ah, refreshing it was. Not that it was right or wrong to say that. It's against the judicial ethos that are prescribed by the West as well. And there's a person in authority saying that in response to a plea by certain people. How is this allowed? How is this acceptable? The reason is xenophobia. He wants the good judicial values for himself. But when he's in the other people's countries, remember, this is regarding India. So Britishers were in India. So when this man who's praising is in India, the person is saying, I have a right to act according to my national custom when I am in India, when I am in another country, and not as per the national custom of that country. Well, the same should be applicable to the Muslims and other immigrants. Why, when in Rome, act like Rome is another argument that is often used. You see these two different arguments. When you want to be in the other countries and want to still follow your standards because you believe them to be better, you say, let us act according to our national customs. But when you want Muslims to act as per your customs, in your countries, you say, when in Rome, act like Romans. And you threaten them. In both cases, you are threatening them. And it is a threat. Because even if you agree that men burning women alive should be responded by women, by those men being hanged. From where this confiscation of all property came? It is because the state is exercising its power and authority, and he's saying, I can do whatever I want to you. I can destroy you. And this is the value that Britishers preached in other countries. They didn't impart justice there. They acted as Sims and White Knights. They said, if you do something wrong, which I perceive to be wrong, threatening other men, because men are afraid of other men, because they see a loss of power. And people in these Western countries were righteous, not righteous enough to be a moral example for other men or to act morally, but to see them as a danger because their own conscience was not clear. They said, oh, I will be violent towards you, and I will confiscate all your properties because I will exercise my authority. This authority is considered both as moral and authority that is coming from power. Then let me say the same thing, right? There are a lot of problems in the West, like for example, false accusations against men. A lot of people, when people in the West subscribe to that. In fact, there are a lot of people in the West who have been punished falsely. And remember, these false cases didn't have any evidence, circumstantial. There can be certain cases in which let's say there's a murder occurs and you are at the site of the murder, and you have a weapon in your hand, and you can be framed for it. In these cases in which men who were falsely accused were jailed, and it was found out later that the accusation was false, and many of them were of other races as well. These men didn't have any evidence against them, any good evidence. There was no circumstantial evidence proving that the rape had occurred, a sexual assault had occurred. Now, let's say Muslims come and they don't agree with all of these things. They erect gibbets to hold Western society accountable. Why should not I support them? It is not only morally right, it is as per what Charles James Napier said. Let us all act according to our national customs and our own moral values. And if a Western culture is acting in a wrong way, then it should be strictly punished. Just like Napier wanted to punish men for that, Indian men. He didn't, remember. Now, this is exactly what I was telling you before. It is a different part of different culture. Instead of understanding the worldview or changing the culture fully, what they are doing is they are challenging those actions in which they are against. This is how the cultural differences were reduced to moral differences. And this is the reason why culture became to be known about food, dance, and practice. There's something that Charles James Napier and Britishers found in other cultures that they believe to be morally bad. So what do? They don't say, oh, Let us try to understand from which worldview it is coming. They said, I don't, this is wrong. This is immoral. And if you act in this manner, we will morally punish you. So, where the culture is there? There's no, he's in India and he's saying that I will follow the customs of the British. So, you didn't give respect to their culture, but you want respect for your own culture. This is nothing but selfishness. All the standards that have been developed, you see, and which are being used against immigrants, were developed, were were not there, and were specifically argued against by the Westerners when they were in the other people's countries. They said we will follow something which is moral, and if it is immoral, it doesn't matter. It is in another culture. We will not give that sort of that cultural difference cannot be used to shield something which is immoral. The same is true of the West. If Western people are doing something immoral, they cannot use a cultural shield. So if they are acting racist, they cannot say, "Oh, it's moral shield," or "I want to preserve our own existence." That cannot be an excuse to do something which is immoral, is it not? And why should not Muslims be allowed to act as per their own national customs, as prevalent at that time from where they had come? Why they should accept the Western customs? That is neither liberal nor it is what Britishers did to other people. See, this is the problem. What is happening here is very simple and doesn't require much deliberation. This is a concept in which Western people want to maintain the superiority of their Western culture. When they went to the people in the other countries and they implemented their own cultures, they said the whole point or the whole argument that was framed at that time was that there is moral universalism. If there is a culture that does not adapt to that moral universalism, that is fallacious, that is false, that is problematic. This same thing meant that West, does not, if you impose your West standards onto the other people, that means that there is no distinction to be had, which means that now you should treat the other people as deserving a default sense of moral values that you prescribed to them. So you should believe that about the immigrants. But now they are saying that no, moral values are not universal. Cultural values are not universal. If they were not universal, then why did Napier impose that on the people of the other countries? The way the people, British people, or the people of the other countries treated their people in their colonies was way worse than the immigrants, how immigrants are treating the Britishers. But Britishers think they both were justified at that long back. This was justified. He's very happy about it. And now, suddenly the argument is completely reversed and flipped 180 degree, and now this is justified. Now the Muslim should act as per as we want and not as per a universal moral standard. Because a Muslim can argue against it, but a Muslim cannot argue against what is the British national custom. A Britisher is can best tell you about. So now we have to act as per the British national custom, not as per our own national custom or as per moral universalism, with which we can disagree and put forward our own point. A Muslim can very well come and say that liberalism is bad. I don't agree to liberalism. It is morally repugnant, and here's my argument against it. It is universally held, it can be universally held that liberalism is bad. To stop him from making that argument, you say that whatever, you have to follow the culture and the practice of the people of the Britain. But then why didn't you do that when you were in India? And why you're not even upset about that? They will get and enjoy every power they can have. Again, if you accept their arguments, let's say we accept the arguments of these people and we say, okay, stop the immigration. And if I am a person who's coming from Africa into the UK, I will follow the UK norms. I will guarantee you again. And when these people will raise their wings again and they come to your country, they will again say these things. I will act according to my national custom. If your custom I find morally repugnant, I will prepare a gibbet for you. They will say exactly that again. Why? Because they have said that and they are not against that. Even though this paragraph undermines his whole argument. It's about a man enforcing British standards onto the people of a different country and shoving down their throat. This is what he argued against. If this whole cultural moral value, his cultural values were not universal, then he should have acted more carefully and being more sensitive to their traditions and norms and approach it from the standard of understanding their culture and then fighting against it. Because the culture can be wrong, but at least understand it if you understand that these actions are coming from a distinct worldview. But if you just want to put a stamp of morally wrong on it, then you have to reap the benefits of that view later. But then you don't want it. And then again, you want that reclassification back into emergence of a distinct and different worldview. That is nothing but deception. And this is not just a deception, it's a deception that dehumanizes people of other races and cultures. And it's exactly what Napier did. This is the reason why he agrees to confiscation of their properties, because he does not consider them as humans. There's nowhere you will see this argument, right? And even if you see that argument, it is a relic of the past. It should not be promoted now. It's a man saying that, yes, I am a white knight and a simp, and I will not just punish you to the extent that you have put the woman in the danger, but more. This is exactly the reason why false accusation exists in the West. This is exactly the reason why the divorce laws are structured in such a way that they ruin the life of the men. And it's up to the Muslims and the immigrants to hold Western people accountable for this immorally wrong behavior. And if it leads to the demise of the West, why should we not? It led to the demise of India, and you celebrated it. You celebrate it right now. Let us all act according to the national custom and universal morality and stand up against the wrong. Many values in these societies that are wrong. And we know that even the Westerners acknowledge that, but they don't want to do anything against that.
All concerned when the widow is consumed. Let us all act according to our national customs. Rather refreshing, right? When men used to talk like that. By the way,
It was also really refreshing then when men used to argue, stand against false accusations. And the people who were acting or who were responsible for putting false accusations, or the societies that were engaged in this immoral behavior, were punished. Remember, from the sign times of the cavemen, we know that accusations should be backed by the evidence. Whereas in many judicial codes, it has been a long practice. Even the Hindu code, even the Buddhist codes, even the code of governance of the Muslims. Only the Westerners are this unique species that are now beginning to fight against it. Isn't it very interesting to know which culture is superior? I mean, even the shepherds 5,000 years ago knew that it was wrong, but it is coming out of the West. So who is superior culture? Let's have this gradation. There's a culture. There all the other cultures believe that the crimes against even the crimes against women should be backed by evidence. Accusations regarding crimes committed against the woman should be backed. But Western people have this morally flip-flop position. So who is bad? And why should we not prepare gibbets of our own? Because it leads to a lot of harm. I mean, you see the videos of the people who are in jail for years before they are released, and it is found out that the accusation was false. Who is going to pay that price? Mr. Raymond? Church? Westerners, someone should have paid the price, right? I mean, it has emerged from Christianity. It should emerge from Christianity. All the good things have emerged from Christianity.
way, being opposed to multiculturalism, that is to say, relativism, is in no way the same thing as being opposed to other races or ethnicities, but rather being opposed to social disunity and chaos.
Social and disunity and chaos can also occur, and it did occur due to progressives, feminists, and other people. But now, feminists established that men and women were equal. Now, you are suddenly using that to attack Muslims. Strange.
After all, racially homogeneous but culturally heterogeneous nations are much more fractured than the reverse. One need look no further than to the United States, where leftist and rightist whites often abhor one another. Or look
This tells us that Western culture is not superior, right? It should be graded low because this is not something that you see in the Islamic culture. So if the whites are not able to form morally strict positions, and this all is a result of enlightenment, which is a result of Christianity, which is a result probably of the Western mentality and thoughts that they have had for thousands of years, then it is bad. Why? Because it means that there is no proper just judicial system which is guaranteed to a person who commits some action. If it goes in the leftist court, he might get a huge punishment. If it goes in a right wing court, he might be not get punishment at all, or vice versa. So which culture is bad? The culture which doesn't have a definite standard of even affording punishment for a crime. I think that culture is the worst culture.
look to the Middle East, where Muslims and Christians are largely homogenous, racially, ethnically, and linguistically, but where the former are ruthlessly persecuting the latter, exclusively over religion. In short, there's nothing wrong if a nation's citizenry is composed of different races and ethnicities, but only if they share in the same worldview, the same priorities, the same ethics, the
And
same
that is not liberalism. So, first of all, we should fight against the liberalism in the Western society, which originated out of Judeo Christian values, as he himself said. So, first, we must stand against Christianity.
sense of right and wrong. In a word, the same culture.